It's been such a great day, so thank you so much for all your amazing conversations and contributions. The day is not over. I'm very, very pleased to announce the last panel. My name's Timothy Manningmore, or just Tim, is much nicer. And I'll be speaking to end with, so I'll do my introduction then. But to begin with, it's my very, very warm pleasure to introduce Liz and Layo to come and talk to us from Sedgwick Museum. And without further ado, I'd like to invite you to the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. It's a real pleasure to be here, and hello to all of you online. And I'm Liz Hyde. I don't know what to do with my specs, sorry. Might need them. I'm Liz Hyde. I'm director of the Sedgwick Museum at the University of Cambridge. And Layo, do you want to introduce yourself too?
I'm Layo. I'm a student at the University of Cambridge doing Earth Sciences.
Yeah, so we're going to co-present today about some work that Layo has been doing with the Sedgwick Museum. I'm going to start off. We're going to talk about workplace culture, role models, and inclusive future for Earth Sciences. So I'm going to give you a bit of context before Layo speaks. We will get to the queer content, honest, but I'm going to give you a bit of content first about why do we need Earth Sciences? Why is this really important? Both Layo and I are Earth Sciences, and I feel sort of coming into this sort of queer space, it's really important to help to sort of contextualise the work that we are doing in the Sedgwick Museum. Okay, very quickly, why do we need Earth Scientists? Here's 5 of many hundreds of reasons I could give you why we need Earth Scientists that I'm going to rattle through really quickly. First thing is this is a global mean sea level curve. Through the end of the Ice Age, the sea level's high, so the ice has melted. It's dropped down, it's been stable. Look how it's going up in the last couple of hundred years. Second one, this is a more positive story. These are cores of rock from Iceland, from an experimental project which is capturing carbon from the air and precipitating it into holes in the rock to store it underground, so carbon capture. This is ash from Mount Pinatubo, the eruption in 1991 that killed 800-odd people, but actually could have killed many thousands more. But the warnings from the geologists about the eruptions meant that many thousands of people were able to evacuate. But otherwise, very devastating impact economically. This is coltan. This is a mineral that is in all your mobile phones and many electronic devices. It's an absolutely critical mineral that comes only from a number of conflict zones, in particularly the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then this is a graph. Don't worry too much about graphs if you're not a graph person, but number of species through geological time. So this is 450 million years, number of species. You see it goes up and down. What it helps us do is understand that extinction has happened throughout the geological record, helps us contextualize the extinctions that are happening now. So 5 reasons why geology is really important. But what to me is incredibly important there when we're thinking about geologists of the future, these are global problems that impact people disproportionately. They really bring out social and economic inequality. And so when we think about the people that are solving those problems, we need people that have broad experience, that have global experience, in order that those problems, those challenges that we're facing can be addressed in an equitable way. So who are the people that are doing this work? What does an Earth Scientist look like? Well, for starters, I went to that reputable research resource, ChatGPT. And look what it showed me. Oh, lovely. Lovely. Look at that. White man with a beard, with a hard hat, wielding his tool, wearing one of those pockety waistcoats. My God, they're always wearing pockety waistcoats in a rugged environment. It says it all, doesn't it? And it is laughable. I mean, I did sigh and I laughed when I saw it. But this is what we're up against. And I know you can, I'm not, there's a more nuanced understanding of AI that we could do this. But what this is telling us, this is what people are thinking the geologists look like. They are not going to solve those global problems in an equitable way. Not at all. The other thing I will say is when I showed it to Layo, Layo said, that looks like all my lecturers. And it does. So we work in a geology department, and I'll talk a little bit more about the museum in a moment. We work in a geology department where 75% of the academic faculty are white men. So what's that impacting on the geologists of the future? I will say there is quite a bit more academic research, and there's been some important surveys about perceptions. It's not just me saying this. ChatGPT, but I think there's a lot of research that really brings home the lack of diversity and the stereotypes that we're up against in earth sciences. So this is from a survey. You just look at rocks and have beards. So it was a survey around 4,000 people not involved in geology. And of course, we do look at rocks. We really like rocks. But we do not all have beards. So this is telling us, leading us into actually this bigger picture, what has been described as the least diverse of the physical sciences. And that's right across all measures of diversity. There's very poor representation of black people and people of colour, and very low retention of black students within earth sciences courses, both nationally and internationally. Women, we were talking about this on the way, actually women are well represented at student level now, but still the leaky pipelines means there are very few senior women in earth sciences departments. Our own department, we have a woman head of department, just started this October for the first time in our department. And the culture and the emphasis in earth sciences on fieldwork, which of course is very attractive to many of us, is also emphasises the need for physical fitness, and so marginalises people who are differently abled and has really, extensively excluded them. And then, so where does that leave us for queer people? Oh, this is there's a sort of a number of publications that have, again, sort of reinforced this message through surveys and things about the sort of the loss of talent across there. What does this mean for LGBTQ people? Again, there has been quite a lot of work done recently, really exploring how LGBTQ people experience both being students and studying, but also working within earth science. And by working within earth science, I mean within university departments, but also in organisations that employ geologists, earth sciences. I use those terms interchangeably as well. And let's not be too depressing, but here's a few findings for us all. Earth sciences has one of the lowest degrees of openness about queer identity across science disciplines. LGBTQ people, this is from a survey around 2,500 people, LGBTQ people were more likely to report devaluation of their work and fear for their physical safety. And the greatest rates of sexual harassment occur in groups that do not conform to stereotypes of geoscientists. So we've got a lot of work to do here to really think about how queer people can feel welcome and can participate fully and contribute fully to earth science. So, Sedgwick Museum, we'll get on to museums now. Sedgwick Museum, this is, we're the University Museum of Earth Sciences. I've shown you this picture partly because this is the entrance to the museum here, the door on the first floor, up those really nice inaccessible looking stone steps. That's another story. The museum is on the first floor, but we are embedded physically within the university department. So the ground floor is the common room and the offices, the top floor are the teaching labs and the research rooms. So we're right within a really vibrant research community, and that really makes me think a lot about what the role of a university museum can be. The museum, we're a public museum. We have around 100,000 visitors a year, but we also support research and support teaching in the university. And I've put an extract from our mission statement there because I feel very strongly in this context, we're about, not just about the past, and obviously as a geological museum, we do past, like big past, like 4 billion years past, as well as sort of the historic past. But we're about the present and about the future as well. And we have a really important role to play, both in inspiring and recruiting that next generation, but also, as some of these studies have shown, it's not just about recruiting people into earth sciences, it's making a culture where queer people feel welcome and want to stay and want to make their careers and want to contribute. So a lot of what we do is about working with our peers in the department, and these are 2 students that we work with, presenting role models to our audiences to say this is what geology, this is what earth science could be. And so in 2019, we made a start on queering the space, and Dan Vo was mentioned earlier. Dan Vo and Ellie Armstrong played a really important role in working with us and with colleagues in the other university museums on our Bridging Binaries project, which introduced queer history and queer tours into the university museums. And Clara, who's pictured there, and there's a QR code leading to the really lovely piece of video, was our student volunteer guide who pioneered that. had very positive feedback, really made a difference. And I think Clara, being a student, sort of was made a really very prominent and very important role model for us. I've put here, if you want a bit of queer dinosaur fun, this is Franz Nopschke, dressed in his, he was a early 19th century dinosaur hunter, but actually one of the first people to consider dinosaurs as biological entities. So that's what we call the first paleobiologist. But a sort of queer and flamboyant man who dressed up in national costume and rode around on the back of a motorbike. So the Bridging Binaries project was really important for us, but also not sustainable. Clara went off into greater things, and we were sort of a little bit stuck about how to pick up this and how to start embedding these queer stories in what we do. And this is where Layo comes on. This was all an introduction to the main event, which is Layo. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Layo, to talk a bit about what you've been doing with us in the museum.
So I was lucky enough to do a placement at the Sedgwick Museum last summer, working with Liz to create an LGBTQ+ tour. With the help of many of the wonderful staff and volunteers at the museum, I investigated some of the queer stories hidden away in the collections. This ranged from people who used to work there, to the historical geologists who saw some of the collections, even to the fossils themselves. There are other LGBTQ+ tours running at many of the museums in Cambridge, such as the Zoology Museum or the Museum of Classical Antiquities. Liz wanted, at the Sedgwick Museum, to create a similar, distinctly queer space, to investigate our queer history, bring it to the forefront, and show the diversity present in earth sciences. This is, as you may have guessed, a little difficult to do. Not only because, well, there aren't really any gay rocks, but because the culture of earth sciences is different to that of classical antiquity. As Liz has mentioned, there's a lot less diversity that's out in the open. We had to really look for our stories, and many of them were interpretations of what, to our eyes, now looks queer only because we know what to look for. I spent 3 weeks working at the museum. In that time, I discovered Anna Gurney, a disabled, queer, female geologist who practiced fieldwork from a wheelchair and lived with a woman for the entire latter half of her life. We have elephant teeth that she discovered in the museum. I got to see the same teeth that this incredible woman found that were just sitting around in one of our displays. I found out about Jonathan Cutbill, who worked in the museum in the 70s, creating one of the first digital museum catalogues in the world. His work here at the Sedgwick then went on to help shape digital catalogues for museums across the country. He is on the tour because after working for the Sedgwick Museum and after doing his PhD in Earth Sciences at Cambridge, he then went on to help found the very famous bookshop Gauge the Word in London. Cutbill was a key figure in the gay rights movement, and his bookshop has become an integral part of queer history and is a hub for queer culture today. I had no idea that the founder of Gauge the Word, one of my favourite places in London, worked in the same place I worked and studied in the same place I studied. I helped write this tour as a visibly gender non-conforming queer student in a department dominated by, let's face it, straight white men, even among the student body. I think I might be the only non-binary undergraduate student in my department, definitely one of the only ones that look it. As a result, I've never really felt safe in earth sciences. I'm aware of standing out and being different. Helping with the tour and everything that came with that, meeting Liz, meeting the other wonderful staff members at the museum, and above all, seeing the effort that is being put into making people like me feel comfortable and give us a sense of belonging was transformative. Not only does the tour show queer people that we have always had a space in earth sciences, but it also shows us that we are wanted here now, today. What we produced is great, and you should all attend it if you're ever in Cambridge. However, for me, the most valuable experience I had was the process of creating it. I learned that there is a place here for me and for people like me. We are welcome, and we've always been here. Back to Liz.
I've actually got a bit more, but you're right. I mean, it feels like, that's a real note of optimism for us. I think that feels like a real positive moment, and I don't want to lose that. But I also just want to say actually how we've taken Layo's work a bit further now. So this is a trail. I've got some copies you're welcome to pick up. I would also say that these fantastic illustrations are Layo's illustrations as well. They're very talented in many ways. And that, the sort of conversation which I had with some of you at lunchtime about this idea about ephemeral versus temporary versus permanent, I hope that this trail actually visibly out in our gallery is a way of taking this work and making it very visible. And the other thing is taking Layo's work and training up other staff to give the tours. So again, we have a sustainable element to that, and we hope that Layo's going to come back and do more tours. But we also, for me, what I want to make sure that this becomes part of our everyday ordinary. That these are stories that are part of what we tell to all our visitors, not just those who choose to see them. I'd also this is just a sort of some pictures just to say the work that's been going on around, prompted by Layo's work about queering the space more generally, about the tours, about artworks. And of course, we just like any excuse to put flags on the dinosaurs, quite frankly. It's a cheap thrill, I know, but it's actually, we've had incredibly positive feedback. So really, that's what we wanted to say, and I sort of want to sort of leave Layo's words with you about the sort of positivity. It feels like we're making some steps about positivity and making sure that we can hold on to and take this forward. Big thank you to all of you for inviting us. Layo has come out of their teaching today, and you know, I think it's got to go back to quite a lot of work. I really appreciate it, but I hope that sort of understanding the importance of this work going forward. And a big thank you to those of us that have helped us. Layo's placement was supported by a grant from the university's Diversity Fund. We're grateful for you for giving us a platform today. Thank you. Thank you.
Liz and Layo, thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful. And like you say, just great to see that kind of optimistic, fantastic work you're doing there in Cambridge. And from one kind of research to another, it's my pleasure to invite Marge up next. Everyone, please make us welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, so I'm Marge Bradshaw, my pronouns are she, her. I'm a freelance photographer and socially engaged artist, and I've got the real privilege of presenting this project today on behalf of our group and my colleagues at the Welcome Collection, who I think are watching online today as well. So I'm going to be talking about equitable gynae healthcare for LGBTQ+ communities. So just a brief heads up in terms of content that I'll be referencing: first-hand accounts of inequality and discrimination, serious illness, and advanced ovarian cancer. I'll also be showing images that feature medical instruments, sex, nudity and pleasure, medicalised nudity and anatomy. And just to be super clear, when I talk about gynaecological healthcare, I'm referring to the 5 gynae organs, which are the ovaries, cervix, uterus or womb, vagina and vulva. But before I get into the project, I just wanted to give a really quick introduction to my work. So I spend half my time working as a photographer doing cultural events photography, and then the other half as an artist working in collaboration with communities on subjects that really matter to them, and that tends to be socially engaged, which I'll talk about in a moment. I also work on social documentary and portraiture projects, and that's usually with underrepresented groups to give a platform for voices who aren't usually heard. So, for example, these images are from a creative commission I worked on with Liverpool Trans and MBFC in Merseyside, and that was in response to the tour of Lowry's Going to the Match painting this last year. I'm really interested in sustainable photography and processes, so a lot of my creative practice involves alternative image making using cyanotypes or plant-based materials like these that you can see here, which were made with, if anyone can guess, it is beetroot and forget-me-nots. So I tend to bring this sustainability practice into my work with communities as well. And when I talk about socially engaged practice and socially engaged photography, I mean that I'm using an approach which is collaborative and focuses on how I work with communities to document what's important to them rather than me doing it for them. So it's very heavy on process rather than a fixed output. So we don't always know the end result, and the conversation itself can often be the work. So LGBTQ plus Gynae Stories is a socially engaged photography project, and it's working with a group of 7 LGBTQ plus people based in Greater Manchester. But we're also using a participatory research methodology, which in this particular context means creating and sharing new knowledge about Wellcome's collections in collaboration with the group. And we took this approach in particular because it means we're being led by the group's interests and needs and experiences in terms of which elements of the collection are researched and which stories are told. And it also means that personal, institutional, and societal impacts are right at the very heart of the project. So in essence, it's about using the Wellcome collection as inspiration for those conversations, our creativity, and also generating new knowledge through shared lived experience. And it came off the back of this, a project I designed and delivered in 2023 called Who's Menopause, which was an Arts Council England funded piece of work with 3 community groups in Bolton, including an LGBTQ plus group. And the idea really was to challenge the traditional narrative of menopause, which does tend to be very gendered and white, heteronormative and middle class. And we, for that project, informally used the Wellcome collection. And one of the most commonly occurring stories or themes that came out of it was the inequitable experiences of LGBTQ plus people when accessing the healthcare system, particularly with gynae complaints, and that was especially the case for trans and non-binary members of the group. And after 12 months of the project, some of the work produced through Who's Menopause was accessioned by the Wellcome, and the LGBTQ plus group were really super keen to continue exploring gynae inequities. So I basically started a period of research and development to look at what might be possible before pitching the idea to the Wellcome collection. And that R&D involved capturing the story and taking this portrait you can see here of Sarah Jane, who I'd met actually at the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester during World Menopause Week when I was sharing the artwork and zine from the Menopause Project. She describes herself as fat, queer, and living with advanced ovarian cancer. And I was absolutely horrified by the stories of gynae inequity that she shared with me because of intersectionality, really, her fat phobia, wider fat phobia, and her sexuality. And that really motivated me to get LGBTQ plus gynae stories off the ground. And just as a really nice aside, her portrait and story went on to be a winner of the Portrait of Britain Volume 7 award last year, which was a really amazing opportunity for us to get her story out to a wider audience. Fortunately, the Wellcome were keen to collaborate on a more formal basis, and we started LGBTQ plus gynae stories in autumn 2024. So we've got 3 aims for the project. Firstly, to give LGBTQ plus communities a platform to voice inequities with gynae healthcare. Secondly, to support well-being by positively enabling group members to share their lived experience of gynae healthcare through photography. And finally, to raise public awareness of gynae issues, so for example, encouraging self-checks. And we've got a range of research questions as well that we're wanting to answer through this. So how can LGBTQ plus storytelling through Wellcome's collections really advocate for change in LGBTQ gynae inequities? So with the project, phase 1 started in September 2024. And that included an in-person workshop at the Wellcome where we looked at a selection of historic and contemporary material relating to LGBTQ plus experiences of gynae healthcare. We talked about key topic areas for further research and really looked and imagined what a more equitable system could be. The collection itself, including some of the images you're seeing in this slide deck, really acted as a springboard for the group to share their own stories, whilst also highlighting the long and quite often murky history of gynae healthcare. And the group told us that they felt really validated by sharing their experiences with others who had similar stories to tell. Then phase 2 happened between January to September this year, and that included monthly online meetings and an in-person creative workshop at my studio in Manchester. And those were designed to continue building the trust and rapport between everyone, and they primarily focused on collection-inspired discussions, including the group's results from cruising the collection, where we'd given them the freedom to start exploring the collection themselves to see if anything resonated with their own queer gynae experiences and interests. And I need to give credit to the Queer History Club at the National Maritime Museum for inspiring us to adapt the term cruising the collection. So yeah, this process is starting to really help identify gaps in the Wellcome's institutional knowledge, and it's showing the potential for collections to really drive equity and real-world impact. We're essentially inviting, I suppose, the members of the group to be researchers, which in itself raises interesting questions around who has the right to be a researcher, who can access knowledge, and who can interpret or reinterpret it. And we're taking a really purposeful, slow, careful approach with this, where the traumas and sensitivities of the group members are really at the absolute forefront of everything we do. And there's plenty on my website, the project blog, about the care-focused approach that we're taking if you want to know more about that. And I should also say that we pay group members for their time plus travel expenses, and they also receive a wellbeing per diem too. The barriers that the group have talked about, particularly around gynae healthcare, are challenging. They're systemic and they're measurable, and they don't just impact access. They directly affect health outcomes with preventable conditions diagnosed later and treated less effectively. And for members of the group, healthcare really is an uneasy space. From GP waiting rooms to specialist clinics, the system is still largely based on heteronormative and cisnormative assumptions. So, for example, many services are branded as women's health, which instantly alienates trans men and non-binary people who also need cervical, menstrual, or reproductive care. Working with the historic and contemporary collection has been a really great way to inspire our group members to share their lived experiences, including issues with representation and appropriate language use, stigma and discrimination, and avoiding healthcare altogether. They've shared stories of providers who lack training in LGBTQ+ health and rely on outdated assumptions. Cervical cancer screening has been one of the clearest examples of inequity and was one of my main motivations for starting the project after personal experiences and hearing the stories from Sarah Jane. So, for example, as some of you will be aware, admin systems often prevent trans and non-binary people from even being invited for cervical screenings if their GP record lists them as male, which we talked a lot about in the group, and one of our group members is a trans man. We're in the early days of collaborating and starting to test out various creative photographic approaches which could share the stories of the members and raise awareness and increase representation in healthcare settings. The creative workshop that I mentioned before that we did in Manchester was inspired by our collection research and the interest that we've kind of developed in the ancient tradition of vaginal fumigation, basically cleansing the vagina with herbal steams, which still exists today in the form of V-steaming. And so we've taken inspiration from some of the collection images we'd explored in relation to gynae health and recreated these as botanically toned cyanotypes. And the choice of toners was influenced by the herbs used for historical fumigation and others that we'd found in 17th century recipe books in the collection for other gynae remedies as well. So, for example, using chamomile and green tea. And it's really interesting, this kind of mindful, slow process of creating the cyanotypes really gave the group an opportunity to talk more about both the historic collection findings and research and their contemporary experiences. So we're essentially using the creative practice as a wellbeing tool for the group members as much as it's driving conversations and ideas development. The inequities that LGBTQ plus people face in gynae healthcare aren't just statistics. We know from this work that there's stories of people who avoid the GP, who feel unsafe in clinics and are denied preventative care. Addressing them isn't about special treatment, it's about inclusion and ensuring that no one is excluded from the right to health because of who they are. And the group really want to raise awareness of that through this creative work. You can see on here, this scene made by Anna in the group was inspired by her own lived experience of going through hysterectomy as a queer woman. She tried to find resources that answered questions about what she could expect during and after her surgery, but there was little available, and she found that gynae healthcare is absolutely full of heteronormative assumptions. She experienced everything from having to come out to medical staff during diagnosis and treatment when she was already feeling very vulnerable and exposed, to assumptions that her main priorities for recovery would be resuming home duties and childcare and heterosexual penetrative sex. This was echoed in the material she'd found in the collection, and so her initial creative explorations have responded to her research and experiences, and you can see some of her process imagery here of a collage work and a video which she calls From Fibroid to Freedom. As this work is collaborative, Gynae Stories has also been an opportunity for me to create work alongside the group members inspired by the collection. So I've been exploring the materiality of cyanotypes and produced some new work using estrogel HRT boxes, which you can see on the left there, and a series of toned cyanotypes using the end papers in some of the gynaecological texts we've been looking at on the right. And I've also been documenting the various images of speculums in Henry Wellcome's museum collection at SMG, including creating a cyanotype animation, which you'll see a short clip of in a moment. So just to finish off then, at the end of phase 2, which was in October, I presented the project at an internal staff event for the Wellcome Trust, the broader trust, along with Sarah Jane by my side, and my collection colleagues who've just been brilliant on this project. And it was such a good opportunity to share the programme with the wider trust, not just the collection. The Wellcome have also decided to acquire the story and portrait of Sarah Jane, so we were able to deliver that at the same time together. So there's already been some interesting outcomes in terms of contemporary collecting through the project, and there may be, hopefully, more. In terms of what's next, the first 12 months has really just been about getting to know each other and starting to make real tentative steps in terms of exploring the collection, potential themes and potential creative approaches as well. We're hoping to begin a third phase in the new year where the group will do further research into the collection, create more work in response and share that more widely, both with internal Wellcome Trust staff and external audiences too, and that will include healthcare professionals. I can't tell you what format that will be in yet because the work is really iterative, but you can follow our progress on my website and project blog. Just in summary then, the group is really motivated by the belief that until our healthcare system reflects the diversity of the people they serve, these inequities will continue to persist. So breaking that cycle starts with visibility and listening to LGBTQ plus voices, and that's exactly what we're trying to do through this project. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Marge. So much to digest there, and fantastic. I'm going to have to look up the history of vaginal steaming when I get home. I am the last speaker, and everyone's been so patient throughout the day. There's been lots of talk. So before I do my talk, I'm just going to invite you just to stand up and do a bit of a stretch, just for 10, 20 seconds. So have a bit of a stretch, shake out your arms, shake out your legs. Great. I always do my neck. I've got my headset on, so I can't do it very much. Okay, great, you can sit down. 10 press-ups. Okay, so officially I'm Dr. Timothy Manningmore. Please just call me Tim. And I have 2 roles that are relevant to today. So in half my work, I'm a lecturer of 18th and 19th century literature and culture at the University of Oxford. And in the other half of my work, I work here at the National Trust as the first and only Inclusive Histories curator. And that's a wonderful role, and it's a kind of a new thing that we're trialing, so no pressure on myself. But the remit of my role is to do with the various underrepresented narratives that exist in the Trust. At the moment, I work primarily in the Bath Bristol portfolio. I'm connected to a specific property, Bath Assembly Rooms, which I'm going to introduce to you a little bit more in a second. But mainly my remit is around colonial histories, queer histories, Jewish histories, histories of disability, anything that we feel, or I feel, that is representing a bit of an absence in the narratives that we're telling at the Trust. My talk today is going to be on one of my favourite topics, which is the queer Georgians. I have kind of three kind of headlines that I want to hit, really. I'm going to just give you a 5-minute introduction to the concept of queer Georgians. I'll warn you, I normally do an hour's talk on the queer Georgians, just because it's so complex, there's so much nuance. I'm going to squeeze it into 5 minutes and skip over a lot of detail, don't worry. But I will do that in just 5 minutes. I will give you an introduction to Bath Assembly Rooms in just 5 minutes. I'm going to sell it to you as the gayest place in the National Trust. It's not in Michael's book, but I'm going to give you a pretty good sell as to why you should visit it and why I think it's so gay. And thirdly, I'll just kind of close up with some comments on why I think we can talk about queer histories and queer Georgians, and why I think we should. I think we actually have a bit of a responsibility to do so. So those are the three main headlines I'd like to hit in my talk today. And I'll finish with a provocative question: is the National Trust, we own hundreds of properties. Do we have a gay bar? And should we? That's how I'll close. Okay, the queer Georgians. There are so many amazing routes that I could do to try and summarize this in 5 minutes. What I thought I'd do is just show you some nice prints and images from the period and just run through a few FAQs. So in terms of some frequently asked questions, were there queer people in Georgian Britain? Well, that's the easiest question, yes. Next. So obviously there's always been queer people and queer behavior and queer inclinations all the way through time in every corner of the globe. So in terms of questions, that's actually quite a simple one. Georgian Britain is no exception. So perhaps the more difficult question is, how do we know about them? And actually, the answer is from documentary evidence. There's so much material evidence and material culture from Georgian Britain in particular about people who record their own experience and who record experiences of others in things like, for example, diaries, in literature of the time, in newspapers, court records. The list is endless. So we can be really confident about the documentary evidence. Obviously, queer is a relatively modern term, or at least it's modern in the way that we use it today. So if you're interested in the kind of terminology that Georgians did use about non-heteronormative behavior, here's a very small select list. You might not be able to read these out, but I'll read these out. So some of the most common include Molly, sodomite, tribade, Tommy, macaroni, cot queen, sapphist. These are just a few of them. And you might recognize some of those, you might not. But I will say that actually all of those terms are a little bit closer to today's language than you might think. So for example, you might not have heard the term Tommy, but I'm probably quite confident you've heard the term tomboy. And a Tommy to the Georgians meant a woman who was interested in masculine activities. I'm quite sure you haven't used the word sapphist in your everyday language, but I bet you have used the term lesbian. And as you probably know, Sappho was a poet from the island of Lesbos. So those two terms have exactly the same historic root. You might say, wasn't homosexuality illegal in the Georgian period? Well, yes and no, actually. It's much more complex than you might think. So what was illegal was the act of sodomy. So that's kind of anal penetration between two men. but it was complex. To be enforced, to be a kind of enforceable punishment that the law could judge on, you had to be caught in the act by 2 witnesses. And as you can imagine, that doesn't often happen very much. And even when that did happen, and it did get to a kind of legal context, it was kind of disputed in court, on many occasions, pardons were issued, many of them by the king himself. And often the juries would decide in favor of the defendant. So often juries were much more sympathetic to this kind of behavior, especially if it was consensual, than you might imagine. So definitely an act of sodomy that was witnessed by 2 witnesses between 2 men that had enough documentary evidence to get to court, that was illegal, and it could actually result in death. Most times it kind of resulted in things like being pilloried, which is still a very unpleasant experience. But the point is, it wasn't always, it was quite rare for men to actually be really punished to the maximum extent for homosexuality. And the point was that homosexuality itself wasn't illegal. In the Georgian period, you could go up to anyone and say, I'm a homosexual. That wasn't illegal. The actual thing, the thing that the law cared about was the act of sodomy. So I guess the last kind of big question is, was there any sense of queer community? And because there was this kind of ambiguity in the law, and because there was this ambiguity about your expression of identity kind of separate to sexual acts, there were many instances of openly queer subcultures up and down the country. I'm definitely not just talking about London. There's all sorts of places, and Bath happens to be one of them. So that's kind of anticipating my next one. And of course, there are many instances of private, kind of closed communities of individuals of queer subcultures. If you want to know what this might look like, I've got 3 choice selections of images for you. So from left to right, we have an image of 2 sodomites from 1702. In the middle, this is a depiction of a molly house from 1780. So you can see that the man is wearing the woman's headdress, and he's kind of holding her fan. And the woman is wearing his hat, and most symbolically, she is wearing his sword. So she's kind of wearing literally a kind of strap-on, and I'm sure you can guess what's being implicated there. And on the right, this is kind of, I don't have favorites, but this is definitely one of my favorite images. This print is from 1820. It's called Love à la mode, or kind of Love as is fashionable right now. And it's subtitled 2 dear friends, and it's 2 women kissing on the bench. This is a cropped image, but the full image shows their husbands behind the hedge watching. And this is a depiction of 2 real society aristocratic ladies. So I'm just kind of giving you a 5-minute taste of, yes, there were definitely queer Georgians of all kinds of genders and identities, and it's not historically inaccurate to talk about that. And I've done my best to squeeze into 5 minutes the nuance and complexity of an hour talk, but that's a little tease for you about the queer Georgians. Let me introduce to you the Bath Assembly Rooms. Oh, I've skipped ahead one. I was just going to give you one instance of someone at the time who talks about gay experience. Matthew Tomlinson is a very run-of-the-mill, everyday Yorkshire labourer, but we have his journal. He writes down his reflections about everyday life, sometimes on very mundane things, but sometimes about things very profound. And this is one of the things that he says about gay behaviour. He says, "It must seem strange indeed that God Almighty should make a being with such a nature, or such a defect in nature, but at the same time make a decree that if being whom he had formed should at any time follow the dictates of that nature at which he was formed, he should be punished with death." You can hear just like an ordinary member of the Georgian kind of populace being like, hang on, like, if God made people gay, then how could God say that being gay... You know, you can see the cogs turning in his head. This is just an instance of the way that everyday people in Georgian England were thinking about these matters. Bath Assembly Rooms, the gayest place in the National Trust, as I'm trying to argue. So this is a picture when it first opened in 1771, and this on the left is a picture of it today. Those two buildings look identical. I have to say that this building was sadly flattened in the Second World War by an incendiary bomb. So most of the building today is a reconstruction. Basically, you have like the four walls outside and everything else is basically reconstructed. If you're wondering what an assembly rooms is, which is very legitimate, it's kind of a cross between a village hall and a nightclub. It's kind of a grand events space, and commonly it was used for balls and concerts and other social events. The Bath assembly rooms were quite strange in that, firstly, they were the biggest in the country, and second, they had a series of other things going on. You might be able to see the word billiards on the front, so they had 3 billiards rooms. They had a kind of parade of shops, so you could go and do shopping there. They had a coffee house, a kind of in-house restaurant there. They had a spa, because it's Bath, so there's a cold bath in the basement. There's a reading room, libraries. So it's a kind of really like a leisure facility, a kind of all-purpose leisure facility. And unlike many National Trust places which are associated primarily with one family or one set of people down the generations, the Bath Assembly Room's purpose was to include as many people as possible. So Georgian Bath was a place that was really dictated by social class and status. You had to know the right people to get into certain events. You had to have the right connections. This building was built with the express purpose that anyone could come to balls, anyone could come to events. It was the vision of John Wood the Elder, and he wanted rank to be laid aside so that all degrees of people could be united in society with one another. That's a very radical, liberal manifesto for someone writing in the 1760s. And it was his son that went ahead to actually construct the building, but this was the ethos in which the building was constructed. So when it opens, people are amazed because anyone can go there and everyone is treated the same. The idea was that servants could go to this building as well as royals. They would literally attend the same events. They would literally sit at the same tables and have the same tea with one another. If you've read Jane Austen, or potentially you've read Northanger Abbey, you'll know that there's a story of a country farmer girl who comes to Bath, goes to Bath Assembly Rooms, and she meets a very rich aristocratic man at Bath Assembly Rooms. The kind of potential for social mixing were really big here. A poem from the time notes, for example, that the people that come to the ball, dukes, drapers, barbers, peers, marquises, earls, knights of the shears, so not just kind of knights as in barons and sirs, but gardeners and barbers, mop-sceptred queens, so real queens came to the assembly rooms, but most of the time, queens of the mop, servants came. So this is a real mixing liberal social space. Quite controversially at the time, ladies could decline partners, and ladies could actually dance with each other at Bath Assembly Rooms. I've given you the spiel. It's a very liberal, inclusive space. You can see where I'm going with the gay inclusivity. One of my favorite examples is the Chevalier d'Eon. If you don't know this figure, they're an amazing personality of the 18th century. Many historians consider them an early example of a trans person in Georgian England. They're born in France as a man. They're assigned male at birth. They have an amazing career as a soldier and a spy. They live the second half of their life in England as a woman. And what's special about the Chevalier, they literally kind of persuade both the French and English courts to recognize them in their new gender identity. And the details are a little bit complex. Some people say that she really is a trans person of the time. Other people say it's much more complex than that. A man can put on a dress and still be a man. We can't go back in time and ask the Chevalier what they would prefer to be kind of referred to in terms of pronouns. But the fact is, they're a very gender-fluid person. The kind of London Stock Exchange literally had a bet whether they were really a man or whether they were kind of anatomically a woman. And one of their party tricks was, because they had this amazing career as a soldier, kind of dressing as a woman and then doing sword play and fencing demonstrations against men and doing a lot better than them. And most places around the country, they could kind of sell out a kind of small venue, but at Bath, in the assembly rooms, they could fill out the whole building, which can hold kind of easily thousands of people. So a sellout celebrity at Bath assembly rooms. I'm just going to give you 3 more examples of some queer Georgians from Bath assembly rooms. One of them is Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire. You might know her from the film The Duchess. She was a kind of icon of the assembly rooms. And firstly, famously, she was kind of in a kind of what we might now think of as a polyamorous triangular relationship, which was the biggest open secret in Georgian England. They spent a lot of their time in Bath, and instead of going into the complexity of her life, I'm just going to say that at the balls at Bath assembly rooms, her contribution was to dress like this. This isn't her herself, this is an example of dress from the time. You might see that as quite feminine, but at the time you would go to a ball in a kind of huge dress, which was very, very feminine. Often it was in quite see-through material, and the feminine way to kind of identify yourself and kind of express your identity was through accessories, through big headpieces with feathers and with jewelry and with lace and trimmings. You can see this is a very bare outfit. This is literally a kind of riding habit, which implies kind of sportiness and masculinity. You can even see she's wearing that high ruff. If you've seen Jane Austen adaptations, that's what the men wear, right? And Georgiana, who's the fashion darling of the country, she normalizes wearing masculine dress like this to places like Bath assembly rooms. I'd say that's pretty queer. William Beckford is another famous kind of what we'd now consider a queer person who was active in Georgian Bath, visited Bath assembly rooms. He's a very controversial person, actually, because what the relationship that he's most famous for is with a person we'd now consider as a minor. And his story is very difficult. There's lots of kind of difficult nuances about it. And actually, there's some people from the Bath Preservation Trust here today, from the Beckford's Tower and Museum. So please say hi to them if you're interested. They're just on this table here. Give us a little wave. But Beckford's an amazing person, and we're kind of really thinking hard about how to present the complexities of this story right now. There's an amazing project which is thinking about the best way to interpret these really complex kind of stories. And finally, I can't go on without mentioning our favourite hero, Anne Lister, who again was a fan of Bath assembly rooms. I told you that women could dance with each other. This is the time of England being perpetually at war with France. There are very little men around. What a perfect excuse to dance with other women at Bath assembly rooms. So that's just some examples of some of the queer people that were frequenting Bath assembly rooms in the Georgian period. And also, I have to stress that this carries on all the way to today. In the 19th century, Bath assembly rooms continues equally queer, potentially most famously and most kind of highlighted by the presence of Oscar Wilde there, doing a kind of series of lectures about fashion and dress. And most recently, in the 20th and 21st centuries, one of the things that I love is drag and ballroom culture. And where better to do ballroom culture than a place built for balls? So one of our recent projects, Space to Have a Ball, kind of featured a real takeover of Bath assembly rooms by gender-fluid drag queens. It was an amazing event. So that's my little cell of the gayest place in the National Trust. I think you'd agree it's pretty queer. And let's finish with that term, queer. It's a difficult term because it's been used so differently throughout history. So it began life literally meaning strange or odd. And this was a term that didn't have any particularly negative nuance. It might be similar to the way that we use the term unusual. If you say kind of like a food has a taste that's unusual, you're not meaning that it's bad, you're just saying that it's something that you haven't quite encountered before. And this is the way that the term queer first came into use. It wasn't actually to the early 20th century when it began to be associated specifically with what we think of as kind of queer behavior, non-heteronormative behavior. That's when it began to kind of gather this stigma, and as the 20th century progressed, and especially with the beginning of the AIDS crisis, this is when it kind of really picked up a very derogatory, insulting terminology. And we have to remember there are so many people to whom this is living memory, so this term is very triggering, and we have to be really careful about how we present that if we're thinking about it in an open interpretation context. I have to say, though, what's really interesting is that at the same time as the AIDS crisis was introducing this sphere of negativity with the term, it was also beginning to be reclaimed by activists. And that's the time when you've heard that phrase, "we're here, we're queer." That was a very conscious decision by queer rights activists. And this is kind of concurrent with the rise of queer theory as well, which began to kind of use the term queer as a term which is useful in its resistance to being a label. It's the only label that further refuses to go on and label. And this is the point that Arya was making later. And this is why I feel myself, as a historian, very useful with using this term. I think we need to just get a bit more comfortable with the fact that as historians, we are allowed to use language about the past that the people of the past didn't themselves use about themselves. I'm a historian, I'm a lecturer, and every single term I use the term Romantics and Victorians. And yet the Romantics and Victorians didn't call themselves either of those terms. I've used the term queer Georgian in this talk, and the Georgians didn't call themselves the Georgians. And yet no one comes up to me and says, "Why do you use the term Georgian? That's very anachronistic." So I think we just need to get a bit more comfortable with the fact that we are talking about people in the past who did behavior that we can relate to today, and we can attempt to try and interpret that past in the language of the present to help accessibility and to help understanding. I have no qualms about that. It is best practice, of course, to kind of recognize and acknowledge that that term is difficult for certain present-day audiences, but it's also part of the process of reclaiming that term. So it's really important that we try and use this term in positive contexts, in celebratory contexts. When I joined the Trust a few years ago, it was a good career move for me, but I was really worried about whether I would fit in. I didn't know whether I'd feel very trusty, whether I was kind of a good fit, whether me, if I knew what I did at the weekend, would be a good person to kind of work for somewhere like the National Trust. And if this language was a bit more widespread, and for example, if some of the research that's coming out now was more widespread, I, as an individual, might have felt more comfortable kind of inserting myself into this space. And that's just one story. I know that there are millions of people. I don't know, for example, how I would have felt about being at the Sedgwick Museum without someone brilliant like Liz there to kind of pave that way. So I'm just saying that I think the term queer is a really helpful category. I think it's an ennobling and an enabling term. I really encourage you to not feel discomfortable using the term, even though it might have some of this baggage and some of this kind of association of being anachronistic. My very last thing, I said that I would question whether there was a gay bar at the National Trust. And what I have done is show you how gay Bath Assembly Rooms was. And at the National Trust, we love letters and cross sticks. So Bath Assembly Rooms is Bath Assembly Rooms Bar. So technically, we have a gay bar. I can hear the silent groans across the room. Anyway, I've been Tim Moore. Thank you so much for listening to me. It's really, really great to have you. Thank you so much.